I want to talk about gardening in a very different way. Everything that grows on this property here is considered by me a life force. It has a couple of these plants have a very unusual characteristic is they want to reproduce, they want to stay alive, they want to prosper, and they want to be able to flower and go to seed. That's the plant's objective. The gardener's objective is very similar. We want our plants to look good. We want our plants to thrive. We want them to flower. We want them to do really well. We want all this to happen with the least amount of energy. So how do you do that? How do you get your garden to look fantastic? How do you get it to be lush? How do you get it to do all those things with you wanting to invest the least amount of time? I think it goes back to the basics of gardening. What I mean by that is location, soil conditioning, plant choice, sun exposure, shade, drainage in the soil. So all the gardening basics will allow your plants to either do well or not to do well. Now, you got to remember gardens always have a forward movement, and that forward movement is a bit tricky. And what I mean by that is your soil gets tired. The sun isn't shining for 2 weeks. It's been raining cats and dogs. Diseases are coming in, insects are coming in, laying eggs, whatever it may be. There's a motion that might go against what you want your garden to do. And if I had to describe the job of a gardener, I think the gardener is a security guard. The gardener is a gardening hose. The gardener is a pruner. The gardener is a maintainer of life. What is the best way to garden in situations like this? I'm a big fan of allowing your garden to go in a direction it wants to go. We always have to remember every plant, every seed has that built-in energy. And that energy has a forward movement, a direction it wants to go towards. You have plant competition, so you have plants competing with each other for real estate. You have plants competing for sunlight. They will send out their leaves and shade out plants below. There's this beautiful mechanism where plants work together. They'll condition the soil together. They'll allow microbes, micronutrients to enter the soil. They will pull down nitrogen with their leaves. There's so much of this interconnectivity going on that is so beautiful in the garden. Now what happens is the gardener can get overwhelmed by his own garden. And when that happens is I always take a step back and I say, okay, this whole section of my garden is completely overgrown. What do? Well, I go in there and take certain plants out, put them somewhere else. So your garden is always a work of progress. I look at it a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle. What I mean by that is, so number 62 is English ivy. Number 73 is variegated hosta, or whatever it may be. So you have the opportunity to make your garden a painting. And the plants have their own objectives. Your plants have their own movement, direction. They want to do what they want to do. But a good gardener will recognize the abilities of the plants to show very specific characteristics. And what I mean by that is, so you have a hosta, it has that beautiful foliage. You have irises that are very sword-like. You have whatever it may be. Every plant has an additional factor to make your garden look good. And the gardener's job is to say, okay, I've got ornamental grasses that I'm going to use against this wall because they'll send out this growth that will do this and do that. I'm going to put the hostas underneath the shade trees because the hostas enjoy the shade and they'll look good. They'll cover up that whole area. So back to the jigsaw puzzle is you're trying to fill in your entire lot or your garden with this built-in, pre-programmed end result that your plants are going to achieve. They're going to move towards how they like to grow. They're going to move towards how they grow. They're going to move towards what they require from you. Constant watering, constant weeding, constant pruning, whatever it may be. You have to sort of pay attention to what your garden is telling you. And unfortunately, gardens do get very tired. And what happens is they're just basically sucking all the nutrients out of the soil. You have to replenish that. The plants have the ability to do a lot of that work themselves. A little bit of additional work will make that go a lot further. And what happens is a lot of times in a garden, you realize that at one point the plants are more powerful than you. And I think every gardener has experienced this, that you have a plant that just does incredibly well in a certain location during a certain time period of the year, and you have to say, okay, I'm going to let you go. You know, you're going to give you 1 square meter, take it over and do what you do, right? So it's a lot of times it's about us not being too aggressive with our gardens. And I think the easiest form of gardening is where you let your plants take you on a ride. You let them take over a certain space. You basically make it look good as they are filling in. In my opinion, there's 2 types of gardens. There's the gardens that have already filled in and the gardens that are working towards filling in. And there is one important trick that I will always give people. Unless a plant is a specimen plant, so like I have Rumpamatamaki here, it's taking over this whole section. Unless it's a specimen plant, I always recommend to have multiple plants of the same species in a certain area so they work together covering 1 square meter. And that'll make your job a lot easier, because you know underneath that plant, you know exactly what needs to grow underneath there. If it's nothing, or if it can be weeded, you know exactly what plant is in what location. Number 76 is, you know, elephant ears, whatever it may be. So you have the knowledge of how you are moving forward to get your garden to fill in. So once your garden's filled in, you should be able to cut your workload in half. Less watering. The soil is covered from the sunlight. The sun can't get at that soil. You have less weeding because the weeds can't get in there because they're covered with foliage. Whatever it may be, once your garden is at that stage where it's established, you are going to be able to tackle a next part of your garden. Be very careful. I'm a victim of this all the time, is that I have a portion of the garden that's doing really well. I will take plants that are, you know, cuttings or whatever it may be, and I'll put it in another part of the garden. When 6 months comes around, your entire garden has the same 20 plants. And I'm a big fan of diversity, so be very cautious with that. A lot of times I put plants on the edge of the property where they're not as visible or not as invasive. And I keep them alive that way by putting them away from the edge of the property. And when you do that, you basically are covering your entire property with this living mat of vegetation. And the moment you do that, it is very strange. What goes on is it's like you sort of have these areas that are microclimates now. They are biodiverse microclimates that attract everything: insects, reptiles, small mammals. When that happens, you know that you've done a good job with your garden. You haven't been overbearing. A lot of gardeners have this tendency, they want absolute structure in their garden. They want absolute control. It's human nature to be that way. And gardening like that is very tough. It's a hard gig to be super structured, controlling nature beyond anything you can imagine. When you do all that, you're sort of in a position where you don't let your garden show off its built-in energy. You are pruning all the time. I've seen many gardens like that where they just don't let the garden be overwhelming. It is very, very contrived. Nature has this ability to fill in bare dirt, seeds, sunlight, water. Vegetation will take over this planet. There are probably certain places on the planet where it's too destroyed now. But I'll tell you, micro climates can establish themselves incredibly quickly. You'd be surprised what plant material is responsible for taking over certain areas. It could be an assortment of aggressive weeds. But as long as they're covering that ground is now protected from the sun. Insects will move in. Everything will move in because the ground is offering shelter to life. Now, a lot of people are sort of talking about global warming and all this stuff, and it's very simple. The issue is that more and more of our planet is not covered with vegetation. I don't know how many times I can preach this, but once you have the earth covered with vegetation, it is magical. I'll give you an example. So I put both my hands here on this leaf, and it is cold. Like, I mean, there's, just by the sense of touch, this is 10 degrees cooler than putting my two hands together. And this thing is a shield. It protects the sun from getting to the ground, to the earth. It is very simple that vegetation has this magical power of protecting us. And I don't know why it's so complicated for everyone to understand. You know, you don't need a 20-foot tall tree to do the job. You know, you can do that with a good selection of, you know, leaves that have, plants that have big leaves. You can do it with many things. It doesn't have to be what we think. This forward movement of getting our planet to be green again is the responsibility of everyone, but it's more the responsibility of the people that actually know how simple it is to cover the earth again with vegetation. There are a lot of countries that are doing an amazing job at that. Saudi Arabia, China, and these countries are fighting back against desertification. They're doing such a good job. They employ the simplest techniques, but they're going back to basics. They'll make these squares out of licorice. They'll put a fruit tree in the middle. It's worthwhile looking after it because you're going to get the fruit to sell. So there is the profitability aspect of it that will, you know, encourage people to do crazy things like, you know, conquering a desert. And humans are running out of good, fertile soil. So this idea of going into areas that have really crappy soil is going to be a big movement in the future. And I think that people will say, you know, we have to use every square inch to feed the planet and to make sure this global warming is under control. If we continuously increase the Earth's surface without vegetation on it, there's very few places that are going to be cool enough, wet enough to grow food. So it is a spiral, downward spiral, where we are making habitats to grow food smaller and smaller and smaller. And that is why there's this huge movement to grow everything indoors. And that has to be prevented at any cost, because that food is designed. It is very strange. I'd be very cautious with that kind of food.